Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the latest Blacksfield's webinar, where we will be discussing the Avior, the latest microprocessor controlled knee, this time with polycentric geometry. Before we begin, I'd like to point out that all participants are on mute to improve the experience, so we don't have to overhear various workshops in the background. The webinar is being recorded, so it can be shared at a later date. There is a chat box, a question panel. Please feel free to answer that, and we will try and answer them as we're going along. Lower down here, we also have the ability, we have a webinar later on today as well in the United States. So feel free to join the Blacksfield Mobility webinars, and I think there may still be a few spaces left for that. So today the host will be myself, John Ross. I'm the Principal Prosthetist and Commercial Manager for Blatchford's. I've been with Blatchford since 1993 and worked in various different roles. And Bruce Rattray will be ably helping me with the question and answering session. He's Principal Prosthetist as well and Commercial Manager, also in the international team. And he will be helping me out and assisting me throughout this presentation today. So today's webinar is all about introducing the Avior. Avior is the latest microprocessor controlled knee for prosthetics that is featuring our Smart Step. Smart Step was designed for prosthetics, but actually some of you may already know it through its use in our Tectus, which is a microprocess CAFO, which we launched a couple of years ago. Smart Step is Blatchford's new digital care management platform, which allows us to request information from the user of the device in real time. We can send them requests for information and do follow-ups on them without the patient having to take time out to come to the centre. We can also review the performance of the device. I'll speak about more of this later on. Avior has been developed for those lower activity amputees, so K2 community ambulators, but specifically not for those people who are doing high impact sports. It's a knee, microprocessed knee with a polycentric joint that will take someone from primary, so immediately after amputation, all the way up to a low K3. So it will give you access to some of the functions you expect as a K3, but as I say, it's not intended for high impact sports. Straight off, the important thing is indications. The unit is suitable for patients up to 125 kilograms. Okay, it was aimed specifically at K1 and K2 amputees. So for those amputees who are starting their rehabilitation program, and for those people who need assistance. We know from the work from Hugh Hare that of those K2 amputees who are given microprocessor controls, about 50% of them will be able in time to progress up to K3. Uniquely, for this group of amputees, this device will allow you to take up to a low-level K3 at discretion of clinicians. And we have patients who can walk up to 5 kilometers an hour on this unit. It's suitable for primary patients. We as the clinician, we can decide the functions of it and we can swap the functions backwards and forwards. It's a very customizable unit that will give you more options. And I'll talk about these again later on. It's only suitable though for patients who are physically and mentally capable of perceiving this microprocessor. If your patient's incapable of charging it or is not happy to charge something, it won't work. Okay, it's a microprocessor that needs to be charged. Additionally, the device has various visual, audio, and haptic signals. Haptic signals, for those who don't know, are vibration and feedback, which we can increase and decrease the intensity of to actually help the patient know what's happening. Contraindications of are definitely for high activity level 4 amputees. Okay, it is not intended as a sports prosthesis. We have really fine-tuned this for those lower level of mobility transfemoral amputees. So any user, K4, this is not a unit for them. Additionally, higher level K3 amputees who are involved in sports or want to walk above that 5 kilometers an hour, so a threshold we have in it, then again, it's not useful. To put it in context, your average healthy adult male will walk about 5.2, 5.3 kilometers an hour. So 5 kilometers an hour is not far off that. Any patient who weighs over 125 kilograms is again not suitable. Is not suitable for bilateral transfemorals, and I will explain more about this later on. Osseointegration or transpelvic applications, because of the advent of the MDR that we have here in the UK and Europe, we have to have collected a lot of details and a lot of information for it, and we just don't have all that type of information ready. So currently, it's not meant for bilateral transfemorals, osseointegration, or transpelvic applications. Those patients are currently contraindications. And it's, as I said, not suitable for anyone who has cognitive problems that will not be able to understand how to switch it on and off or remember to charge it, because these are necessities to operating the device. So the first question people have been asking is why microprocessors? Traditionally, microprocessors have been aimed at the K3, K4 markets, mainly as a result of the funding requirements in the United States of America, among other countries. However, many of us as clinicians have saw that actually for our K2 amputee population, which is one of the larger populations in the world, if we can give them the confidence to walk and the ability to walk, then they will do better. So what we've been doing is looking to give the benefits we have shown for the microprocessors, especially in our K3, to those K2 amputees. Okay, so the benefits of this are well researched for K3 amputees. We know that technology delivers constant functionality, and this reduces falls and injuries. And this will increase the patient's confidence. We know that the more confident the patient is, the more likely they are to walk. The more likely they are to walk, the more they become confident, and therefore this can actually help to increase the patient's overall activity level. If not increasing it, at least preventing from decreasing. We've all known patients who have had a history of falling in our clinics and treatment areas that they fall once or twice, they then become so frightened about falling, they reduce their activity. Then, because their activity gets down, they continue in a downward spiral until they do very, very little walking. Okay, we're trying to buck that trend and bring these people back to being community ambulators and getting them to do as much as possible. And why we want to do this? Well, to be honest, you want the person to be as active as possible. We can reduce the overall long-term medical costs, keep somebody mobile, where that mobility is, they just want to go into the garden with their family, walk to a bar, walk to a restaurant. It's all about keeping the patient active, involved with their family and peers, and reduce the number of injuries that these people have. That is our ultimate goal as prosthetists. So when I look back at the problems with traditional K2 knees, we know that there has been shortcomings. Most K2 knees do not have a yielding function on it. So the simplest being will be when the patient comes to a set of stairs, they lead with the prosthetic leg and then step down with their sound limb. And they keep on doing this to get the bottom steps. Unfortunately, as they lower themselves onto the sound leg, this creates a large bending moment at the knee on their sound limb, contralateral limb, and at this point, they're actually straining that. When I first joined prosthetics, we didn't really consider the overuse of the remaining limb. We were so determined to look at the prosthetic limb, we forgot the damage they were doing to the limb. So a simple thing allowing the patient to yield down steps will reduce the joint pain. Sitting down, how many low activity K1, K2 patients, they get to a seat, they want to sit down, and then they have to take their weight completely off the leg and then sit down just using one limb. Now, we as clinicians, we know that many of these K2 amputees we come across, they have significant other comorbidities that actually can be bigger problems to them than having a transfemoral amputation. So by allowing yielding and controlled sitting, we allow the patient to share their weight much more evenly, reducing the amount of strain on the contralateral limb, and overall improving the patient's care. Again, slopes, the ability to walk down slopes. And this knee has been designed to go with a full range of feet, but you can use our hydraulic feet with it as well. So it will give you a good slope ascent and descent and allow the patient to stand much more comfortably in slopes, deal with different angles of slopes, different cambers, and keep them safe. I always think back to when we started this, when I saw the lower activity patients trying to approach the clinic that I worked in London. We were at the bottom of a steep hill, and you just saw time and time again these lower activity patients who couldn't control the prosthesis and the knee. They got faster and faster as they went down the hill, purely because they couldn't control that. By using microprocessor control, we give them that control back. And then finally, stumble recovery. Mechanical legs, they require the leg to be either fully extended or only slightly flexed, and then they will help you. These legs, they will actually give you a stumble recovery to try and save the patient from falling, so that if the leg is restricted or the walking gun's unbalanced, either as the leg flexes or extends, or while the weight is on it, then at that point the stumble recovery should be able to come in. So the Avior is our solution for these K2 amputees going up to K3. And that was our initial premise for the design, to get these people. Well, we started developing it, then we developed it down to the lower K1 amputees, those primary amputees. So we have three base configuration modes: lock, which means the leg is locked in swing, and locked in stand space. For those of you based in the United Kingdom, that is much like our SACL. Lock free, this is a unit that's locked in stance, but free in swing. Okay, so this is like a stabilized mechanism for the UK, so the patient can put their weight on the leg while it's in slight flexion, and it will stabilize. Okay, and then when they lift their weight off, then it goes into swing phase. And then we have yielding free, which most of us are quite aware of using for our K3 amputees. Here we have a toe release that releases the leg into swing phase. The patient can ride the yield to sit down to deal with slopes and stairs, but the leg is free in swing phase. And all three modes, the user can sit, okay, and using the yielding position. So even if you have your patient in a lock position, so a SACL, the patient can sit down by using the yielding mode in this knee. They don't have to press any switch to sit down, and it means we're encouraging the patient to use both legs, so therefore reducing the chances of long-term damage to the contralateral limb. Additionally, we also have the ability to add stance flexion in all configurations. So we have controlled stance flexion that you can add in lock, so a SACL with stance flexion. This, as we know, stance flexion gives you a benefit for the loading rate in the socket, which will improve socket comfort. It gives you a more dynamic progression along the length of the foot. And these things are also things of benefit, not only just for our higher K2 and K3 patients, but for all patients. And again, for those who've been dealing with this historically for a long period of time, if you get someone used to using stance flexion in early rehabilitation, then they find it more easy to deal with and cope with as they progress through the rest of the rehabilitation program. So the configurational settings, this is probably the hardest part of it. You need to lock. So it's locked in stance, it's locked in swing phase. The unit will allow the patient to sit down. So the patient can come, they move to the chair, and then they can sit down in a relaxed manner using the weight in both legs. Also, as they stand up, the leg will give them, as they get high enough, the leg will give them support. So many of us, again, have saw in clinic with patients who are quite ill, that as they begin to rise, they may not go all the way up to standing, and then they collapse back in a chair. With this, we can actually give supported assistance to getting them up there. So actually, you can actually use the leg to ratchet the way up to that lock position or top the lock knee. We have lock free, traditional. It's weight activated. Once you put your weight in the knee, whether it's flex or slightly, whether it's flex or extended, the knee will lock up and support the patient. Then as they take their weight off, then the leg is in free swing and we can control the swing rate. And then finally, yield free, our setting for our low activity K3, early K3 users, we have the ability to use the sit and the yielding mode for leg over leg descent stairs and limited cadence control for changing speeds. As I said, in all three options, and all two locking options, lock and lock free, you have the ability to control stance flexion. And this can be set at 0, 5, or 10 degrees, depending on what you require for your patient. Okay, so if your patient has been walking on a knee, for example, K2, they want to try a microprocessor, they've been used to using a leg that is locked, they may not initially like stance flexion, you can put it at 0, or you can add it to 5 or 10 and build them up with it when you work with a physiotherapist to get a better result. Okay, I've run various training courses several times on this knee, and one of the first questions that normally come up is why do we bother with polycentric, which most of us are used to using in mechanical knees where we're looking for high stability, when I also have the ability to have microprocess controlled stance, which will be better than microprocess control. They will give you better than the changing function. What I'm trying to say here is people often ask, why do we use a multi-axle geometry as well as a microprocessor? There's other advantages to multi-axle geometry as well as giving you improved stability. So those can be the improved coupling of the socket to the patient. So therefore keeping the patient in better control and better couple in the socket will give them better control and hopefully better comfort. And also, as the knee is extending, it helps stabilize the patient inside the socket. So we're actually looking, by using the polycentric, we're actually trying to reduce that joint, which we often forget about in prosthetics, which is the joint between the patient's residual limb and prosthesis. Okay. So the basics. The unit is built with three configurations, as I said, time again: lock free, and yield free. Okay, and then on top of these, you can start fine tuning it to suit your individual patient. So controlling the stance flexion, how much stance flexion you're going to allow your user to have as maximum. You can independently control the stance extension. So once you have that stance flexion, how the leg extends for the individual. You can control the swing extension control, how it's moving backwards and forwards, the standing support, and especially the standing support for those of you who are used to using the Blatchfords or Ryan and Lynx. This will allow you to how much pressure the leg will support. So say you have someone who's a young baby, they maybe want to hold some more weight on it, or it could be how quickly the standing support comes on and off. You have these controls. With the controlled standing and sitting, and this has been an improvement on our earlier modes where we had deep yield. and I'll explain a bit more about this later on, but this controlled sitting down, you can actually fine tune it for the individual. So for example, you may want initiation of a flexion very easy and then to ramp up quickly. Okay, you may not want it always to be the same how the yield works for them. And then we have dynamic slopes and stairs. This fine tuning is what is fairly unique to the Avior because we have decided that you as the clinician will know your patient better than we do. Also, we've decided that we are going to allow you to mix and match to give you the best outcome that you think is right for your individual patient, as opposed to trying to preset the ideas from settings from us in Blatchfords. Forward walking, we use various release parameters. So tilt of the leg moving forward, forward angle of velocity from that movement, and then a toe load. But for this toe load, you need to be within 10 degrees of full extension for it to release. Otherwise, it will go into stumble and detect that stumble is activated and then try and save your patient from falling. As I said, stance flexion is available in 0, 5, or 10 degrees, even when it's locked in stance. So you go, we again see stance flexion. We know that it allows shock absorption at heel strike by allowing the knee to flex. This reduces the rate of loading of the residual limb, giving the users elastic responsive skin longer to take place, so therefore reducing the chance of damage to their skin. And as I say, many of these patients have comorbidities that may be a bigger problem to them than actually having an amputation. This is all fine-tunable, so you can fine-tune it to the individual, so you can either switch it on or switch it off. You can control how much stance flexion you have and also how the rate of it happens. These are all fine-tunable programs. So what you have for your K1 new amputee primary may be quite different from what you get when you get to the end, towards the lower end of K3 amputees. Spine extension, we have two basic settings. These may be slightly counterintuitive. Fast does not mean for walking fast. Fast means that the leg will extend rapidly, so the patient is aware that the leg will always be extended quickly, so they're more confident putting the foot down, knowing that the leg will be fully extended. Normal, on the other hand, is what we consider normal walking. In normal walking, what we do is we fine-tune the program to match the patient's preferred walking speed. Then the microprocessor will do the rest around that for the slight changes in cadence you can get. But that's the difference. So fast is when you want a rapid extension of the knee for patients with lower activity, or maybe those patients who are new, to improve their confidence. And then normal is when the patient's walking normal and you're at the point where you want to be able to give them a larger range of cadences and you fine-tune the walking for normal walking speed. Standing support we've taken on from our existing microprocess knees because of the popularity with it. Once the patient stands still for a certain amount of time, then the knee will go into a lock mode and then support the patient. So this doesn't matter if the knee is fully extended or with slight flexion, the knee will give you a full lock load, okay, and be able to support the patient. Then the patient has to move their body forward or backwards sufficiently to deactivate this, okay. Is very simple. I think about this when we first started using this in our K3 microprocess knees. A patient I knew who was a doctor said that he hadn't realised before how often other doctors and nurses always wanted to stop him when he was on a ramp in the hospitals, until he suddenly had something where he didn't have to think about it. So because it's been so popular before, we've kept this function. Controlled sitting, you can see here. It's in two parts. So what we need is we need a heel load, so pressure on the heel, and then the shank, the knee to move backwards, and then for the leg to slow down. At that point, it descends as the patient is sitting down, and it will adjust to do that. From my experience of using microprocess knees with K2 patients, they're not like the user here. Many of them will actually have the leg against the chair to make sure they're going to sit in the chair. So personally, what I do is I teach them to rock their weight gently forward onto the ball of the foot. And then as they lean backwards, then they create that heel load. They also create the posterior shank movement that's required. And then all they have to do is reach down for the arms of the chair as you see in this video. And at that point, they have the angle velocity deceleration, and everything goes together to give them a very easy transition from stand to sit. At this point, we as a clinician have the option to adjust how they sit down by adjusting the various modes. Also, when the patient gets to stand up, once they come to within 45 degrees of fully extended, the unit will go into a ratchet mode that will allow them some assistance to get up, so it will prevent the leg from collapsing under them. However, we have an abort mode. If your patient has started to get up, but is not going to get all the way up, once they pause long enough, then the leg will lower them down. Okay, so they will immediately flip back into sitting mode. This is a safety option for them, just so that the knee is always supporting them and keeping them safe. Slopes and stairs. We can adjust the walking speeds. We can adjust how the resistance is happening. As an example, if you use a mechanical yielding knee, the yielding resistance you have is the same as the knee is at 89 degrees or a degree from full extension, and as it flexes through the range. That means it's very easy to initiate flexion and start at yielding, but there's not enough resistance at the end of that flexion to fully support the patient. In Blatchford's were earlier microprocessed knees, we had a deep yield where this resistance increased as the knee flexed, and that was deep yield. However, with this, we've gone a new step further, and we've allowed you to split it into two parts. So the first part, you set up for the patient to determine how easy or how difficult they like it to initiate yielding or into flexion on the step. And then the second number is as they're decreasing, as the flexion angle is increasing, how it ramps up. So it means that it's not controlled by us as engineers and process and Blatchfords, but it's controlled by you to suit how your individual patient works. Stumble control works throughout stance and swing phase. So you can see here, our user is trying to make it stumble. I don't think there'll be many real K2 amputees prepared to do this in the bars, but he's doing everything he can to try and make that knee fall on him or collapse, and then making sure he can get his knee, his contralateral limb down to stabilize himself. Okay, so wheelchair mode, patient moves, the leg will put the leg between 10 and 45 degrees, it gets 5 beeps, and then if they hit the foot, they will switch off, or if the patient wants to, they can extend the knee further. They can extend the knee further to switch off. This is seen as being a key thing for these lower activity patients who are going to spend more time in the chair, so they can get the leg out of the way. The beeping noise may become annoying, okay, especially if you're in the clinic and you've got 5 or 6 of these in the room at one time. So you have the option to switch the beeps off, okay, and then just rely on the haptic feedback or the vibrations the patient will get. But as I say, once the patient's sitting down, it's in sitting mode, they put the knee to 10 to 45 degrees, hold it, they'll get 5 beeps of the vibration to let them know it's on. And then as soon as they either hit the foot or they manually extend the knee further, then it will switch off. We have a manual knee lock mode, which the patient can activate by pressing the buttons. I think this is mainly a historical point of view because we've had it in every other knee, okay? But the stance control you get from modern microprocessors is so good that we don't really use this, but you do have the option to use the buttons that are actually on the knee to switch it onto a manual lock. That means that the patient will then be able to extend the knee, and then once fully extended, they will then walk in a lock position. It may be of use for some hobbies, etc., as it was designed for the other K3 knees. If you have any electronic problems, battery failure, whatever, the unit will go to safety mode. Safety mode, same as in our other microprocess knees, is a very high yield, high stable position. However, the patient will still be able to get the knee to flex should they need to get into a car. They're not forced to use the leg as a lock knee for sitting down. The unit is IP65, okay, which is probably the highest IP rating of any K2 knee on the market. Microprocess knee, it means that the patient can trust to get wet. If they're out washing the car and somebody hits them with a hose of water as they're doing it, they'll be safe. They walk through a sprinkler, again, they'll be safe. Okay, the idea is that the unit will protect the patient and they don't have to worry about these type of things. We have 2 days of battery life from normal use. You have 5 hours to full charge. There is an on-off switch if you want to last longer. So if your patient's going, talking to the team in Norway, they like to go up to the forest or the dacha or whatever, the mountains. They're going to be away from a battery power over the entire weekend. They can then start juggling the power by switching it off at night when they go to bed, switching on again in the morning, so they can extend that full 2 days of use. Okay, so that's an advantage of that. To keep in line with advancing technology and requirements for registration, we've gone to a USB-A magnetic charger. So USB-A is a connection you have that goes into the plug, which means it's much easier to connect to other points. So for example, say again, using this patient in Norway who's going up to the mountains for the weekend, they can take a portable battery bank and then plug it into that and charge the knee overnight. Okay. The volume and silent modes, as you already saw, the beep noise can be quite loud, and you have the option to reduce the volume, and you can also switch it off completely. On the downside, I've already met physiotherapists who quite like the beeping noises because it means that it's a feedback to the patient that they're doing something right. So, for example, can be used in training mode when you want to actually teach the patient how to load the toe to get a good step. Okay, so these type of things, how to walk backwards and safely. So this audible feedback can be good for the patients then, but they may not want it beeping when they're out, so you can switch it on and off at different points depending on. And similar, we have the haptic feedback, which is that vibration, which again we can increase and decrease the intensity for. The polycentric design is not purely about increasing stability. Okay, so we are replicating the polycentric movement of the knee, and there does seem to be something in this. Those of us who are used to using polycentric knees for our K2 and K3 patients are used to the fact that patients feel that they feel lighter because of the way the bends, the way the leg rotates on them. And certainly my feedback from fitting this unit in clinics and real patients is that it doesn't feel as heavy to them as you'd expect. No, it's not that bad. And again, I think part of that's got to do with this natural motion of the knee, how it keeps the socket coupled to them better so that they actually feel more stable. Come down to the actual product itself, it only comes with a fixed pyramid. Those of you who are used to using other Blacksford's microprocess knees know that we normally have the ability to have a sliding, rotating pyramid or different adapters on top. This one only comes with a fixed male pyramid, but we do have an M36 threaded adapter that can be attached to it, that can then be screwed straight into your 3 or 4 prong pyramid to give you as short a build height as possible. The touchpad, the kneeling pad in the front can be replaced should your patient wear it out or want to replace it or it gets marked. That's available there. We have gone for a black carbon fiber finish. This has been as a request from prosthetists around the world that people don't really like the painted finish on normal microprocessed knees that are already available for K3s. Because if you get someone who's kneeling on the floor, playing with children, whatever, and they get it chipped, that annoys people, or they have to cover it. So we've gone for this high gloss finished black carbon fiber that is much more resilient than paint, and therefore will last longer for them. So it's sampling at 250 hertz, which is the number of times a second. It's actually checking the sensors in the knee and comparing them to our algorithms. We've got 41 definable events that the knee is looking for, and these events are then built into the algorithms, and then from that we then determine what the user is doing. Those 41 events are looking at 176 calibration points, how flexed the knee is, what angle the knee's at, the timing from fully extended to full extension, where the load is, where the moments are bent on. And we have 15 sensors in the knee that are actually allowing us to collect all those points to feed back to the patient's program that we as a clinician set up, so that we can actually make the patient as safe as possible and actually improve the patient's confidence. Build height. We can see here the unit's 294 millimeters. If you look at the diagrams, you can see that actually as the knee flexes, we go from 294 to 256. So we can see that shortening the patient gets as they sit down, and then they pull the leg under them. This will make it easier to sit in a car, to sit in a bus, a cinema, whatever. The unit weighs 1.35 kilograms. This is complete with a 30 millimeter pylon and a 30 millimeter distal female clamp adjustment. Okay, we don't use any instrumented pylons, so it's any 30 mm pylon you happen to use in your workshop. Maximum user weight is 125 kilograms. Key things on here is that knee flexion, we have 130 degrees as a maximum of knee flexion in this unit. When it comes from our fitting, you have to check and make sure that the socket does not hit the knee. So you may have to lower that to 110 degrees in some examples, but that you'll talk through that during fitting. As I say, it's IP65, weatherproof, and the warranty is for 3 years with the option extending that warranty. Sitting, we've already seen collected some data just to make sure that the evidence that we had for K3 amputees is followed on with the lower K2 amputees. So for example, looking at the effect of being able to load both legs when sitting and sharing the weight evenly, does this actually help with the loading both sides? Here we can see a woman on her first day walking backwards and then immediately sitting down. So the unit is safe to walk backwards because it's not detecting a forward acceleration. The patient walks back and then they sit down just by having that weight on the heel and then leaning back into the chair. Enhanced shield for a larger range of support. As I say, we had deep yield in our K3 knees to allow the patient to come down. But what we have here is we have the ability now to break that deep yield into the start resistance, which is the initial resistance of yield that the patient would have. And then we can actually have the end resistance, which will allow us to change these values to suit the individual. Example being, I spend a lot of time in China. People tend to be shorter than me. They may not need the maximum resistance to be that much higher. However, if you were in Scandinavia and your patients are all 1.8 meters tall, then as they sit down, and especially if they have a chair that is lower than their knee center, then they will need that resistance to ramp up to lower them into the chair. And again, remember, this is intended for lower activity users. So we are looking at those traditional K2, very low K3 amputees, and we're supporting them into the chair so that they are protecting their contralateral limb. This is initial feedback from a short study that was completed here in the United Kingdom, where they took a group of patients of traditional K2 knees that would be supplied through the National Health Service. These people were then given the Avior to wear, and then they were asked to mark it out of 1, be very unsatisfied, 5, very satisfied, and give it a mark and just complete the data. As you can see, the average that the patient got was 4.5. I don't want to spend too much time on this because I'm not sure if this is actually going to be presented at a conference at some point. So I think the group who did this work is actually planning to do a proper paper on it themselves. But we could see that there is an improvement, and also that the patients, these K2 patients, found that the unit was an improvement in what they've been given before. Foot selection, the same as Blatchford's other microprocessed knees. The knee does not control which foot you use. We expect you as the clinician to choose the foot that best suit your patient. However, we recommend Navigator and Avalon, which are typical K2 feet, especially in the United States, and then the Esprit and Epirus in those countries that can use carbon composite feet for these people. So if your patient's going to get to K2, high K2, low K3, then these can be ideal feet for it. This will really be determined by your funding and what funding you have in your country. And also, as I say, what your patient is best suited for. And again, we leave that to you, but we have a range of short-keeled multi-axle feet. We have hydraulic ankles that work with this, and carbon composite feet that we've already tested and proven that it works for. Compatible feet, again, let's say just more detail on it. So the Avalon K2 hydraulic foot gives you all those benefits you expect. There's a good paper from a research team in Nottingham University looking at the Avalon with patients from the Nottingham National Health Service Rehabilitation Centre, and what they showed was that giving these K2 patients a hydraulic foot gave them very similar benefits that we'd found when we had looked at the K3 amputees. The Navigator, for those who don't know it, is the updated version of our traditional multiflex foot, turned upside down the ankle and then built into the foot. Gives you a lower build height and double the plantar flexion, which makes it more stable at heel strike. Esprit, the basis of all our K3 feet, carbon composite foot with a long toe lever, and then the Epirus, which I use a lot of overseas. Again, that carbon composite foot, but with a multi-axle joint above it, which we can fine-tune to suit the patient. So it really worked well with transfemorals and bilateral patients by allowing us some fine-tune of how the carbon springs work. The big thing here we're really moving on to is Smart Step, which I'll finish with in the last one. So Smart Step is our patient activity monitoring. 10 years ago, myself and Andrew Rees, another prosthetist, we did a lot of work looking at activity monitoring for amputees. This is really just giving this up to a modern logical conclusion. So Smart Step is the technology that's built into the Avior and Tectus, which was initially launched on. It's a digital health management system. So it works out the outcomes for your patient. You can work out how much time they're walking. Do they actually do things? Do they do stairs? I always think back to one of the patients we had who walked into the limb centre, pushing his wheelchair, and then walked out at the end of the clinic, pushing his wheelchair. And he told us he took his dog a walk 3 times a day. And then when we put an activity monitor on, we found he actually was walking a dog 3 times a day. And he was actually probably as active as we were, even though he was quite an elderly man. So this gives you a real-time evidence of what the patient's doing outside the clinic. So it's no longer just what happens when the patient does a Sunday best in the clinic. And the Smart Step app is going to become a much more common feature in all Blatchford's apps going forward. So for us, it starts off by allowing us to program the device. It's simple and easy to do that. We have the gait visualizer on it. A useful use of this, the patient can video themselves or get somebody to video them walking in the app. It will synchronize all the details from what the knee is doing and then share that with you as a clinician. For example, we've all had the patient who's come in and said, oh, your leg's good, but there's one thing I do that gives me a problem. The patient can video themselves doing that option and then send it into us so we can see what's happening. It means we're removing the guess and we're not spending good, valuable clinic time trying to recreate something that only happens once every blue moon. It allows us to access data remotely so the patient doesn't have to come to the clinic. They can send that information to us. You can carry out activity sessions at home. So, for example, your physiotherapist has been training someone how to walk down steps leg over leg, and then you ask the patient to carry on practicing at home. The patient can video themselves coming down the steps leg over leg, and then submit that information, almost like homework, as one of my patients called it. They can submit their homework to the physiotherapist in the process at a later date, at a time it suits them, to prove they've been carrying on with the data. We have a group of preloaded surveys that are built into this, so you can send the survey to the patient. These are based on the most common published research papers that we have. You can send that to the patient and ask them to complete it. And because it's not a letter in the post, but it's something that's going to their phone, they're getting an email, they're getting a text to say, can you complete this for us? Okay. And then that information can be shared with the prosthetist, physiotherapists, and doctors so that we actually have real evidence when we have multidisciplinary teams to discuss. Visual access, you have the ability to do some fine tuning in the access. And as I said, also by using the gait visualizer, you can make sure the patient's performing tasks at home in a safe environment, which means that the physiotherapist doesn't have to go as often to do a home visit. They can actually ask the patient to perform something, send in a video, review it with the patient next time they're in. It means that the patient can keep on practicing even when the physiotherapist is not with them. Smart Step is now available. You need to log on, open up your Smart Step, create an account. Once you create an account, everything you have been trained for will show on it. So, for example, if you've been trained in K2 Avior, those icons will come up and allow you to choose those devices. You see here, you click on the device. So if you're programming an Avior, you click on the Avior, find the device. Many years ago in clinic, I unfortunately connected a device remotely to another device. So we have a 4-figure that you add for all our devices onto the Smart Step app to make sure you connect to the right device. And then you can start programming. Fine tuning. We have a selection of fine tuning so that you can, as I say, take this leg from a K1 up to a low K3 amputee who's not doing hand-pack sports, and you can change things like the walking speed, the stairs. So once you've done a full program, you only need to change the part that's wrong. The volume feedback, you may have already heard that I'm not the happiest with the beeps, so you can switch it off, but you can actually adjust how the haptic feedback works for the patient, or you can put the entire thing in silence. This is the second product that Blackforce has launched recently, where we have had definite physiotherapist guidelines that are written by a physiotherapist for physiotherapists. Okay, so this is good. We have training programs set up for physiotherapists explaining how the device works, how to assess the patient for it, and then the rehabilitation both pre and post delivery for a physiotherapist. And as I say, they're written by a physiotherapist for a physiotherapist, as opposed to trying to take what we normally speak about in prosthetics and then trying to shoehorn it into the physiotherapists. In summary, Avior is all about safety and confidence. Walking down slopes, giving them that extra stability, giving them that extra confidence to complete a task. Sitting down or standing back up, the sensors in it and the algorithms automatically detect this. So even if you have the leg set up as locked, so working as a SACO, if the patient puts their weight on it before they're fully extended, it will still stabilize them. And then it will allow them to ride that hydraulic ratchet up to a full extension. Or alternatively, when they want to sit down, they don't have to press any switches and then sit down only in one limb. They can sit down sharing the weight in both limbs. We have 3 basic configurations: lock, which is SACO, lock free, weight activated knee, and then yielding, typical K3, And then you can actually fine tune each setting for the patients. And then Smart Step is available for everything, which allows the prosthetist, the wearer, the physiotherapist, all to talk about the same event. Okay, it removes any misconception about what's happening. We can track the activities the patient's doing. We can also send them requests to complete questionnaires or do data for us. Thank you. That is what we have today on Avior. If you do need to, please feel free to contact us. We can send you more information, organise training sessions for you. Feel free to contact your local Blatchford's representative. Thank you.